You ever have one of those days where it feels like in the span of a few hours you've compressed a whole week, and all of a sudden it feels like you've got a million things happening and a billion things are moving at light speed and you're just sort of swamped and frantic and overwhelmed? That's what happened to me this morning. See, because today's Monday, and at least it is when I'm recording this. I don't know when you're watching this, but today's Monday, and it's not normally my streaming day. Normally, it's a day I prep stuff for later in the week. It's a very casual day. I'm just sort of relaxed. It's no big thing, and it should be an easy thing. And then all of a sudden, as I'm writing out my schedule, just letting people know, hey, here's what's coming up this week, I look down and I'm like, Tuesday afternoon. Why does that sound familiar? Thinking, oh, it's just when I'm going to be streaming something. And then I look around my notes and all of a sudden, oh no, it's not just that. It's a whole pile of other things. I've managed to schedule three totally very separate things for the same hours because scheduling is great and I'm totally aware of that and I pay attention to it all the time and never get it wrong. So a bit of frantic action later, a bit of panic and a meltdown later. I am here now with you to cover what we would normally be talking about tomorrow. And today, ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, non-binary pals, friends, writers, makers, doers, enthusiasts, jugglers, scribblers, note takers, sun worshippers, lotion lovers, hat wearers, people who can appreciate a really nice rake, anybody who's had a cookie in the last 6 minutes, people who are currently dealing with very difficult things, anybody who's having a really busy day at work, nacho lovers, cheese likers, people who know what the little like round edge of a shrimp fork is for, and most importantly, the comrades. Hi, I'm John. Hello. I'm here to help you write better. And today we're talking about plot. But first, I need to close this door so that it doesn't slam when the wind blows through. So you're going to wait here like 2 seconds. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. I'm still here. Hang on. Hang on. Still here. Okay. Door closed. Today we're going to talk about plot. We have quite a few chunky bits to cover. There are some examples. I'll try and keep this pretty not technical. It can get technical. That's the downside in talking about plot. The other downside I want to bring up just before we really get moving is that a lot of what you're writing, whatever it might be, is incredibly specific to you and how you're writing it. It's not the idea of like, oh, well, your plot with the horse and the quest is wrong. That's not the problem. The problem is always how you've arranged it. But since I'm here and you're there and I haven't read your work specifically, I can't tell you if you're doing it wrong. Not at the level you are probably expecting me to here. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through just some general plot structure, some general ideas that you can apply to whatever you're writing. Whatever the genre, however deep you are into it, whether you've just started, whether you're about to start, or anything like that, I want to show you how much of a roller coaster plot can be and how much of a roller coaster plot should be when we're making whatever we're making. Who knows how this is going to go? Who knows if, we're going to cover this in 20 minutes or cover this in 10 or cover this in an hour? The only way to find out is to do it, right? So let's get started and do it. We're going to start with some basic definitions because it's always good to get on the same page for definitions, right? If we run around with a million different terms, we're never going to get anywhere. Let's organize ourselves. We're going to start with what a plot is. And there are three ways plot is normally taught to writers. The first and most common is plot is conflict. That's the easiest way to explain it. It's not necessarily the only way, but it's certainly the way we get most people started when we have them thinking and developing and working on plot. It's just a nice way to understand it. And really, you can expand it out to mean this. There's a conflict or a challenge, some kind of problem that needs to be resolved or handled by the protagonist or group of protagonists if you have them. That plot or conflict can be an obstacle that needs to be overcome. It can be a bad guy that needs defeating. It can be a job that needs doing. Usually it's a single obstacle or a single problem that gets handled. Plot is conflict. This allows you to understand the need for tension in your plot. Will they solve it? Are they going to handle it? Is this going to be a thing? Is that going to be a problem? Plot is conflict is a great starter set for writing plots because it immediately lets you think about two sides in opposition to each other, which for a lot of people gives them a better handle on how to move things forward. You ask yourself, well, what's my hero doing in this moment? How do we get them closer to squaring off with the bad guy or the bad thing, whatever it is? Plot is conflict is a great way of getting your feet wet in plot waters. But there's a second way. We can go a little deeper now. This gets a little bit more abstract. And as we move forward from 2 into 3, it gets way more abstract, but we'll try and keep it grounded. Plot is a reaction and plot is about interaction, is a slightly headier mix of things because now instead of only thinking about the tension in opposition, good guy versus bad guy, now we're going to look at lots of different things in lots of different directions, all pushing and prodding each other. So we've got conflict and the resolution of some conflicts and challenges we haven't gotten to yet and who the people are and what they want and where they're going and what else is happening in the world. And it's sort of this interconnected series of dominoes that you topple one and it splatters out in 5 different directions and it knocks those over and it knocks those over. And what about these? And what about this? And it allows you to see that no matter what's happening in your story, things are interconnected. Now, I want to point out, because now we've gone from plot as conflict to plot as reaction, interaction. These are not separate things. It's not like we are picking one of these 3 flavors and saying, this is my story. No. These things are all true of all stories. It's just a matter of how you, the writer, focus on it in order to write whatever you're writing. So there are going to be times where you are crafting your story, writing your chapter, writing your scene, whatever, where you are going to look at plot as a conflict because that's the easiest way for you to communicate with the reader and get across what you want to get across. And there are going to be other times where you are going to be looking at the reaction and interaction of all the different story elements. Maybe a few, 1 or 2 character things, a world building thing, a challenge over here and a problem over there. Reaction and interaction helps tie pieces together, giving them a relationship that you can exploit for tension, for drama, for passion, for context, for lore, for whatever reason. Plot, reaction, and interaction is something happens, something else responds to that happening, and then because there's been a response, a new thing then happens. And it just cycles from event to response to event to response over and over and over again till you get across what it is you're getting across. But let's go one level deeper. Plot is movement. Now, we are now in full abstract waters because when I say movement, I'm not talking about characters physically, walking across New Zealand or something. Plot is movement is about an implication, a concept of this idea that the story is forever moving forward under some kind of momentum, being pushed on by some kind of force. So I want you to think about a ball, maybe a bowling ball, or just a ball you're rolling across your kitchen counter or something. Some force is pressing on that thing and it's rolling, but you don't have to constantly keep pressing it. You started it off with enough force that it took on momentum of its own. Plot is a movement, allows us to look now at how the story flows from one idea to the next. Here's an event, there's its goal. Here's a new event, there's its goal, and so on and so forth until we cover however much space. Now, not all goals and not all events are going to be the same size because in the course of our heroes doing their heroic thing, not everything's going to be equal. We're not going to spend 6 pages on every action scene. Sometimes it's going to be, 5 pages or 2 pages. Sometimes a conversation is going to be like 3 lines. And that's fine. It can be unequal. It can be unequal on the page. It can be unequal in text. It can be messy and jagged all over the place. But those are our 3 definitions we're going to work with today. Conflict, reaction, interaction, and movement. Hello, everyone in chat. Good Lord, when did you all show up? It just sort of exploded. I was talking to nobody, and then I look up, and the little screen's got like digits on it. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming on a Monday. I appreciate it. It's nice to have you. So, we've got our three plot sort of defining models. I'm stripping out a lot of jargon in there, but we've got our three lenses for plot. Let's dig some more. In conflict, there are 3 points we want to think about. And these are going to come up again later as well. But there are 3 conflicts in a story typically. And when I say typically, I mean like 80 to 90% of the time. And you don't have to go and try to reinvent the wheel here. There's nothing wrong with having these 3 conflicts. Now, sometimes some people are just going to have 2. And while that's not technically wrong, it can severely limit how a story affects a reader, right? It's sort of like I have a tricycle, but then I take a wheel off. It's still a vehicle, but it's not effective like a tricycle would be. We have our 3 conflicts. We know that there is a conflict, the easiest one to deal with, is that there's a conflict involving the characters and the status quo of the world. We recognize that as the plot. Big picture stuff. We have to save the malt shop. We must defeat the evil, pirate. We have to go on a quest. Status quo of the world is in danger. That conflict is a plot. There's also a smaller plot, a smaller arc, I should say, an internal one where a character has a feeling or a belief and they have to go do something about it. They want to go see if it's true. They want to verify it. They want to poke it with a stick. They want to do something. We recognize that as a character arc. And usually most people cover those 2 things. We've read enough books, we've seen enough television shows, we've watched enough movies. We can point out character arcs and we can point out plots. Where things get a little dicey for a lot of people is this third conflict. A conflict involving a lesson that the reader and character can learn together or at the same time. That's a theme. You might not or might be shocked as to the amount of writers who skip this part or who pay it enough lip service to put it into a query letter, but not really grasp it as a thing to do more with. It's not just like a tick box. Like, oh yes, I have a dog in my story. I have a theme. There's a whole video on the channel about theme for a reason. It's a big deal. It's a publishing requirement. It's significant. And really the easiest way to frame a theme, if you've never had to scratch your head about it before, is there is a lesson you want to get the reader and character to learn. Putting it in the story is a matter of tying it into events of the story. Plot, arc, and theme, our 3 conflicts and challenge of a story. On we go. But when we're looking at, now we're going to go deeper to plot in reaction and interaction, I want you to think about, those videos you see where somebody's got like a bottle of soda and they put a Mentos in it and it just sort of explodes. That's supposed to be the little drawing I've got over here on the side of the screen where you're going to introduce a Mentos into your soda. Everything in your story is a series of messy interactions because there's pressure and goal and desire and push and pull and want and take and loss and fear and panic and regret and action and relationships all between all the different people and things and the world and this and that. So if we have, 4 elements in our story, A, B, C, D, everything's got a relationship between it. They're family. They're afraid of each other. They're scheming against each other. 2 of those people are dating. One of those things is the world and it's broken and it needs somebody to fix it. Find a way. And honestly, if you're looking for a really good structural mapping device, make a list of all the things in your story, all the people, all the bad guys, all the good guys, all the cities, all the countries, all the continents, all the kingdoms, all the friends, all the whatevers, and figure out what relationships those things have to some, ideally all, but some of the other stuff in the story. How does this kingdom feel about those things? How does that lady at the church social feel about those 2 other random characters? Find those relationships. Now, maybe it won't come to anything. Maybe it won't be a big deal, whatever. They're just minor characters. They're never going to interact. But maybe there's also a chance for you to use this interaction, use this relationship, use this piece of story to say something monumental. Who knows? You won't know until you try. On we go. Plot as movement. is about events and responses and then more events. The easiest way to think about this is by looking at a series of events that have a direct cause and effect relationship. So, for instance, let's say our story has a lady who hates her job. She hates her job, whatever their job is, doesn't matter. But she decides that she's going to fake a company, create an alternate company so that her real job can be bought out and sold, and then she can get a severance package and move on. So she's got to create this fake company to fake a merger. But now, having done that and made that decision, she's got to take this action. But because she takes that action, she now also needs to go to step 3, which is all of a sudden turning out to create a fake company means you've got to make a real company to set up a fake company. And now she's doing a whole different job. 1 to 2 to 3. There was a relationship between not the specific actions. She filled out forms in number 2, but then she had a phone call in number 3. It doesn't quite work that way. But the events have a sort of a collective connection from 1 to 2 to 3. That's how plot moves. If you want a movie example of this, the best way to understand this is to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, because that is a story where the plot is about movement. Indiana Jones is always moving. He's running, unless he's like stopped for a moment because bad guy has intercepted him. He is always moving because the story is always moving. There should probably, maybe I'll do it on Patreon, an entire walkthrough of why that works the way that it does. But for now, let's just go with plot is movement, because 1 leads to 2 and 2 leads to 3. So you can argue that 1 initially will eventually lead to 3. But on we go. Are we good on definitions? Because now we're going to connect those definitions to something substantial. Here comes the story triangle, which if you've been around here for a while, you've heard me talk about this. The story triangle is the interdependent relationship between the elements of story. The plot needs characters and a world in order for it to exist. If you take away the plot, the characters face no conflict. So here's Scream from 1996, because it's awesome. If you took the plot away of this movie and you just were watching these people go to high school, it's not very interesting, because there wouldn't be any killing, because it wouldn't be a horror movie, because nothing would happen. And in the absence of conflict, your characters don't change. I don't know if you know this, but that's a terrible idea. We want our characters to grow and change, because the reader's going to sit here and not just see the events play out. They're not just coming to watch a slideshow. They want to be engaged with the story. They want to be grabbed by it. So we need to make sure those characters face conflict and change as a result of that conflict. You need characters in order to do the plot or have it happen to somebody. But let's go one step further. If we don't have a world where the plot can happen, Sauron doesn't get defeated, because Sauron will just be there doing whatever. Without the plot, your world doesn't change in your story. And ideally, we want the world to change, because we want the good guy to win, or we want the couple to fall in love, or we at least want the bad guy stymied for a moment until he escapes from Arkham next week. Without the plot, the world cannot be changed on a substantial enough level to make a difference. Yeah, little stuff can change all the time. Oh, we made this kind of pie this week versus that kind of pie. But we're dealing with bigger picture stuff here. The plot is affected by the world is affected by the plot. And you need it. So all these pieces feed together in a connected way. You can't take one of them out and have the other two just work. And you can watch this happen with a writer when they underdevelop their world. They only make enough stuff in the story for the characters to be somewhere to do a thing. And the world never feels fleshed out. I'm going to this room because we have to have a conversation here. I'm going to this place because we have to find the clue here. Underdeveloping your world so that you're limiting it to just what the story needs reveals to the reader that, oh, this place isn't real. I'm watching a stage production. I'm watching something that's been over-engineered. We want to avoid that. You want your world to feel substantial. To do that, by the way, just as a quick aside, you don't repeat the same 6 adjectives, over and over and over again. It's a dark and stormy night, and it's a stormy and dark night, and it's a rainy, stormy, dark night. You don't belabor the single points you have. You find different elements, not the storm, not the darkness, not the nightness of it, but you find those pieces and you find different ways of expressing different facets of a single thing. So you've got yes, you've got this room we go into to find the dead body to do our crime, but you also have parts of the story where we're just here. We just go to the shoe store because side character number 6 needs new kicks. Give your world more than just what the plot needs. It'll make a huge difference world-wise. But we're talking plot today, not world. We'll cover world some other time. For now, on we go. Let's break this down. Let's take plot apart. Let's poke it with a stick and see what happens. How do we build a plot? What do we need? All plots. I don't care what kind of plot. I don't care if it's redemption. I don't care if it's an action story. I don't care if it's a double twist. I don't care whatever it is. They all follow this structure to some degree. Now, sometimes we're going to repeat this structure to get into 5 acts or 7 acts. Sometimes we're going to break this thing up to get it into 4 acts. Sometimes we're just going to split it in half and do 2 act. That's fine. But we're always going to follow this structure more or less in shape. There is an event, a discovery, or a decision to kick us off. Then from that moment, there is a buildup that escalates. We get new info, but it comes with a cost. It comes with more challenges. Everything builds to a single peak, or at least in this iteration, a single thing that involves the mostness of the story, whether that's the most number of characters, the most danger, the most risk, the most reward. And then it resolves afterwards because the thing's been done. It's a very simple triangle. You take 2 of them, you've got 5-act structure. You split it in half, you get 4, and so on. But this is our element. So let's walk through each part. Let's take a look at what each of these things is. When we get into writing advice and you really start digging around on social media for how to explain something or do something, so this makes, hey, Pete, it's good to see you. Yes, this will make your character feel more real and relatable because their experiences will be what the reader is used to some degree. Like let's say your characters gain superpowers. That's not relatable to your random reader, but they'll understand the idea of like, gosh, I'm a high school kid and it's really hard to be in high school, Spider-Man. So yes, it can lead to more real and relatable stuff. Good question. When we poke around, I'm going to back up half a second. When we poke around and talk about like plot components, like the ingredients, people get real fussy, especially on social media, because they want to like nail down terms, like kind of like they're trying to get the teacher's credit. Like, oh, pick me, I know the answer to this, which is not great. We don't want to do that. We want to do better than that. So when we're looking at constructions and ways to frame and shape this, we need to think about how we're going to build the plot. So we're looking at that first element, right? We've got that idea of how a plot starts. The element that starts the plot, no matter what, is an action. Something has to happen. So the typical thing people point out is, yeah, well, what about the dead guy? What about the body in a murder mystery? The guy being dead isn't the thing. It's the discovery of the body that leads us to, well, how did he die? We want an action that is either implied, meaning we know it happened, but we didn't see it. Like, oh, this guy's been killed because there's the corpse. Or a visible action, which is something we watch happen. Sauron forges the One Ring. But there's always an action at the start of a plot. Whether it's on the page or off the page, it's always there. Now, here's where we're going to fly in the face of accepted, I'm making air quotes, accepted kind of writing advice, because everybody's going to go, well, what about the inciting incident? As if that's supposed to be like this big gotcha moment. So here, let's test your theory. Let's take a look at your inciting incident, okay? In the first Star Wars movie, what's the inciting incident? Is it Princess Leia putting the plans into R2-D2? Is it Luke Skywalker discovering the recording from Princess Leia? Or is it Luke committing to Obi-Wan that he will go to Alderaan and become a Jedi like his father? Fun fact, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because there is no one single inciting incident in any story. There are three. I know. I know. But remember those 3 points we talked about way back with plot and conflict? Plot, character, and theme? Guess what we have here? Plot, character, and theme in order, vertically, because I made a nice graphic. So the plot kicks off when she feeds the plans to R2D2, because that's the whole thing that gets the ball rolling for the story, right? But then Luke discovers the plans, and this allows Luke to kind of get involved and change as a character, because now he's got a mission. Now he's not just some kid, a farm boy on some lonely desert rock. Now he's driven to do something. He's got an arc. But later on, he also commits to a path that's going to take him beyond what he knows. He's going to grow and become something greater than he ever thought possible. That's his thematic inciting incident. There are 3 inciting incidences in a story. In your story, you need them. You should be able to find them. Now, that said, yeah, you can double up. You can have one moment of a story be more than one thing. But let me caution you, you don't want one thing to be all 3. It's going to seem like you didn't think it all the way through. It's going to seem like you skipped a few steps and you just kind of rushed it all together. But you can definitely double up something. That's fine. But you definitely want to make sure that your inciting incident, you're not just talking about it or thinking about it as though it's this one thing that we're going to put on a very high pedestal, because it's not. I know social media will simplify it, but that's because social media strips nuance out of everything. They don't care about nuance. So 3 inciting incidents: plot, character, and theme. We're never going to walk around going, hey, buddy, how's your thematic inciting incident going? Because that's a weird thing to say to a human being. But all the same, thinking about it in 3 separate layers allows us to take this story apart and fix it when it breaks. Oh, I've got a problem with my thematic progression. Oh, my character arc stalls out. Okay, now I know what I need to fix and what I need to leave alone. It doesn't matter where your plot starts. It doesn't matter where these things kick off. It just has to kick off somewhere. On we go. So once we start the plot, we've moved from Act 1 into Act 2. When we're developing the plot, which we're going to do now through the entirety of Act 2, there are 2 kinds of scenes that develop plot. And if we've hung out before and you've been here for beats and anything like it, you're going to see this before. There's investigation and discovery. We're gonna put those together into investigation, discovery, just for me to keep things straight. So investigation or discovery and consequence. Those 2 kinds of scenes, you could take your story right now, lay it out and go, what kind of scene is this? It's either investigation or discovery, or it's a consequence, meaning it's a scene that that pays off something you set up. So we're looking for information in some way, shape, or form, and then we find it. And the consequence is the cost we pay for having found it. Now, don't let those labels bog you down. I'm not just talking about like murder mysteries. I'm not talking about like the detective searching for fingerprints. Anything can be an attempt by a character to gain information. A conversation. Hey, why did you sit with Billy at lunch? Um, a moment of reflection. How do I feel about, oh my God, I can't believe she wore that dress today? Or in a romance novel, I wonder how that person feels about me. I should go see that. I should, go to them and see them at their workplace. Anything a character can do could be some way, shape, or form of them going to find information. Don't think of information just as like, I'm Googling something. Information is also the idea of like, here's a thing I want to know, and I'm going to go do something about it. Now, because they have this question, we're going to talk about plot questions in a second. But when they have this question, how does this guy feel about me? I better go to his job and find out. There's going to be a consequence associated with it. There has to be a cost. There has to be a price. There has to be some kind of challenge or some kind of problem. Otherwise, the information wouldn't be very difficult to get, and it really wouldn't be very interesting. Me picking up a pen is not really a problem. My desire for the information of, hey, where's my pen, is right there. But if I suddenly, make it a challenge, let's say I don't know, remove both my arms, it's suddenly a lot harder for me to pick up my pen. There's always a consequence somewhere. Now, murder mysteries and detective stories illustrate this clearest. So my example here is Batman, because Batman goes looking for clues. He finds some pharmaceuticals. This is an early episode of the Batman cartoon. He finds some clues. There's a scientist. He's doing some experimenting. And in the course of this experimenting, in the course of looking around the lab, he discovers that the scientist in question has turned himself into a giant bat. I know, you're shocked too. And then Batman encounters Man-Bat as the consequence for Batman looking for clues. That is a really straightforward way to understand this. But because he goes looking for clues and then he encounters Man-Bat, then he has to go deal with, he crashes on a roof and he goes back to the Bat Cave and he puts more pieces together. He goes looking for more clues. He deals with Man-Bat again over and over until he comes out on top. There's always investigation discovery to do. There's always consequences to pay for. And then there's always more discovery based on what the consequences gave us. 1 to 2, back to 1, back to 2. That's how we develop a second act. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter whether we are walking from the Shire to, Rivendell to Rohan to Mordor. Doesn't matter if we are sailing the seven seas looking for the fabled pieces of silver. Doesn't matter if we are, performing the Herculean labors. There's always a character driven to do something and then a consequence that they pay or deal with for being driven in the first place and discovering something along the way. This is true in Disney movies. This is true in the Muppets. This is true in cartoons. This is true in anime. This is true everywhere. This is how we build a second act. On we go, because the second act continues all the way until we have no choice but to face a climax. Now, that climax is the peak moment where all the tension and all what we're going to recognize as questions have to be answered. There's no higher point. And ideally, this is a single point, a single moment, not necessarily a single scene, because if you have multiple characters, you can spread these out. 2 people over there, 2 people over here, 2 people way over there, but they're all going to roughly happen in the story at more or less the same time. We don't want to space these things out too far, because then the story starts feeling poorly written, loose, disconnected, messy, less critical and less organized than you might think. So for your climax, building to that climax, when you've got your plot, throughout every scene, throughout every chain of scenes, you want to think in terms of the questions and challenges that your characters are facing. So here is a basic list of questions. This is by no means the only list of questions. It's just the basics. Will someone survive this encounter? What happens when this person meets that person? How will the hero get out of this? Who did the murder or the crime or the jewel heist or the whatever? How will these 2 people who just had an argument get back together? Will the good guy win? How will they win if they win? What happens to the bad guy? Who wins the big game? And for me, the big question you always want to frequently check in and goes, what cost comes victory? Victory should not be easy. It should take a toll. It should be a challenge. That's what your second act has been posing. These questions have been building and building and building because we've been gaining information. We've been following the characters. We've been rooting for them to succeed. We've been watching them do stuff because they're trying to answer these questions. They haven't answered them yet because that's what the climax is for. And then we get to the climax. No matter what the climax is, the climax should always have the answers, period. Whatever questions, whether you're asking 1 question or 10 questions or 65 questions, doesn't matter. Your climax is where your answers live. So it's how do we, cement our reputation as Ghostbusters, defeat Gozer the Gozerian, save New York City? We cross the streams. How do we handle a change in the way Marvel tells its stories? How do we break the fourth wall? How do we relate to a new audience and grow the way Marvel does storytelling? Well, we clearly point out that in this particular world, some of our expectations are false and our character can speak directly to us. Or for Star Wars, how did Darth Vader become Darth Vader? Right there. That sword fight. The climax always has your answers. If for some reason you've been answering questions before the climax, those questions were setups to different questions. If you answer your question too quickly, is that person really my long lost twin? And oh, I guess they are. Well, then it wasn't that big a deal to begin with. Some questions, yeah, the small ones, the minor ones, answer them in the second act. That's totally fine. But the big deal questions, the ones that you swear up and down, oh my God, this is important to my story, it should be answered by the climax, somehow, some way. Whether that's a villain monologue, no, Luke, I'm your father, or whether it's, a statement made at gunpoint, or, just they find the missing files or whatever. Your climax should always have your answers, period. Still with me? Everybody good? I'm going to get a mouthful of water, and then we're going to keep going. All right, here we go. So if our climax has answers, what happens when we answer all our questions? Behold the resolution. So when the questions are done, you've got to end. One of the great failings people experience, especially when they're writing early on, is that they either drag the hell out of their resolution, Lord of the Rings style, where we've just got like 5 damn endings over and over and over again, or they rush right through it and we're done in like 2 pages. Yeah, I'm making numbers up on the 2-page part, but it's the idea that you're rushing through it. So let me give you 4 points to consider that will help you kind of slow your resolution down while making it decently satisfying. 1, here's a biggie for the social media crowd. Do not force a cliffhanger. You don't need to. I know you want to write a series. I know you want a huge audience. I know you want to do this forever and ever and ever. You can. That's fine. But you don't always have to drive it to a cliffhanger to keep the reader engaged. In fact, when you do that, you are revealing that you are afraid of, the audience not being engaged. So you are forcing them into a position where hopefully they are. Because remember, you can have a cliffhanger and they could still not care. They still have to go buy the second book. And if your first book didn't get them, there's no guarantee the second will either. Don't force a cliffhanger just to keep the reader around. Likewise, you don't have to over-explain everything. This is not saying like some of those details will get explained in book 5 when you just finished book 1. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to bring everything up. Some stuff's just going to be the way that it is for this book, and then later, whenever later is, you'll talk about it. Is it later yet? No. Then you're not going to talk about it. You do not need to over-explain everything. Just explain the stuff right now that's important right now, that wraps up right now. Likewise, we don't want to force a door open, which is the publishing phrase for how easy would it be for there to be a sequel. First of all, not every story needs a sequel. And unfortunately, some of the stories that got sequels should not have gotten sequels. But we don't want to always write it, whatever we're writing, in a way that the sequel is just sort of like, oh yeah, I guess that's how they make a sequel. It's another case for the detective. It's, then a new neighbor moves into the neighborhood. You don't want to force that. It should feel organic the entire time, because if it's stapled on, if you've just sort of like smushed it into place because, oh my God, my readership, my audience. If you force it, the reader's going to pick up on it, and no good's going to come from that. The more you force in the resolution, the weaker your plot is going to appear, even if the plot was totally fine. Don't force it. If you don't bring it up, you don't bring it up. Oh well. The reader doesn't need everything explained to them. They are not babies. They do not need to be spoon-fed. You're overthinking it. And lastly, You don't have to rush a mood, which is an easy way of shorthanding the idea of, if you want somebody to feel satisfied, write something that is satisfying. You don't have to like dictate the conditions under which your characters exist. Then they were happy and they lived happily ever after. Again, fantastic for children's stories, but you don't want to deprive your reader of their own emotional experience with the book. Because if your book knocked their socks off, whatever book, whoever the reader is, you want them to be able to sit with their feelings and go, wow, that was amazing. I love that story. But if you get in their face and you start saying, well, you should feel this and you should know this and you got to have this, you're not helping them have their own feelings. Don't rush to get to the big scary twist or the big moment. Just don't. It's not going to help. When the questions are answered, it's time to end the story. The resolution is where everything ends. So let's take a look at some resolutions. We're going to go clockwise around my graphic. We're going to start with Glass Onion because it had a nice resolution. Our rich billionaire loses everything and waits for the cops to come. Everything in flames behind him. He's destroyed and loses everything. And that's it. We don't find out what happens the next week. We don't come around and go ask, well, what about this? And what about the car? Doesn't matter. This is just where we left off. Moving clockwise, this is Carrie. Carrie is a not great example, but it's a good example in a bad way. Because at the end of Carrie, there's this moment where Carrie's arm reaches out and grabs a girl who had bullied her. And then we reveal that the girl is really in like a hospital or in home or something. And she's having a terrible like nightmare about it because, oh my God, Carrie will get me. And it's supposed to show that the story has lasting, lingering effects on the people. You didn't really need that. But this is a scary movie perspective. Yeah, it totally gives us one more scare out of a movie that had just, telekinetically murdered a ton of folks. Moving around, though, we get to The Godfather. At the end of The Godfather, Michael lies to Kay. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be great. I'm just doing some stuff. And then through a divide in the door, she realizes, oh, there's this whole other world of which I am a part. That door will later close and will go to credits, further cementing the idea of she is divided and separate from him. And there is a world on the other side that she is not a part of. And by extension, nor is the reader or viewer in this case. But that's how the story ends. It doesn't need to be mega satisfying. We got our mega satisfying. Abe Vigoda does it and everybody else is dead. And here we are. Coming around the clock one more time. This is the end of Ocean's 11. They have completed their job. We've robbed the casino. We got away with it. We're sitting here watching the fountains. We're going to have a moment where each of these characters individually walks away. Do we cover the particulars of every single minute thereafter? Not really. We hand wave it in the sequel, but we're not there yet. But we just walk away when we're done. We don't stop and go, well, what happened at the other casinos? What about that guy at the slot machine? Doesn't matter. We don't touch it. Didn't need to be there. The resolution is how your story ends. That's all it needs to do. On we go. If we were going to build a plot and you were like, hey, John, can you make this like crazy simple for me? Sure, I'll make it simple. Let's suppose we have 6 steps. You can build a plot in 6 steps. Here we go. Step number 1, you want to start with a conflict or a challenge that has the biggest, greatest impact, and you want to frame it as a question. Can you survive when there's an alien on your ship hunting you? That's the question underneath the plot of Alien. Alien is the example for these steps. So you take your big plot, you take your big conflict, your big villain goal, find a way to frame it as a question. Can our hero defeat the monster? Can the knight go on and save the day? Will Batman save Gotham? Will truth and justice prevail? Who knows? Find your conflict with the biggest impact on the world of the story and on the characters and make it a question. Next step. Take your main character, your protagonist. If you have more than one, you're going to do this more than once. That's fine. But find your main character and then give them a goal. They have a goal somewhere that connects them or relates them to this plot. somehow, some way. It doesn't need to be the exact same question, but it does need to sort of tie into some element of the plot. In our case, our protagonist's goal is Ripley doesn't want to die. Now that ties back to our main question because the alien is killing everyone. So now we have a protagonist goal that is tied to the main plot. You don't always have to think about it like this, but it's real helpful if you got into the habit of doing it, especially if this is your first book. It just makes life a lot easier. So if our main character has a goal that is in some way connected to the plot, our character's actions and their arc are they're going to work in tandem together, the arc and the plot, keeping us on track, moving the story forward without us having to add on extra stuff. Now, let's go to step 3. The protagonist at some point over the course of the story has to have some opportunity or multiple opportunities to resolve the question in step 1 and accomplish the goal in step 2. So 1 plus 2 equals 3. For us, it's Ripley doesn't die because she doesn't want to die, and the alien is killed. So can you survive? Yes, you kill the alien. 1 plus 2 is 3. With me so far? Because that's 2/3 of the plot. On we go. Let's add a few more bits and pieces, though. We want to make sure that our story ends with one or more satisfying elements. Now, those satisfying elements do not have to be limited to, oh, golly gee, my characters get a happily ever after romance ending. That is one satisfying element. It's not the only one, doesn't even need to be the biggest one. That's just one. Satisfying elements include things where the audience, your readership, go, yeah, good job, protagonist. You've done a good job. I'm happy about it. So let's look at a few satisfying elements from Alien. The alien is dead. Yay. Ripley's alive. Yay. And the cat doesn't die. Yay. Satisfying elements. Simple. Sorry, Yaphet Kotto, you died. Make sure your story has some amount of satisfying elements, because if you just keep yanking them away from the characters, the reader is going to have less and less of a reason to stay connected and care about the story. It doesn't need to end happily, but there needs to be something positive that a reader can walk away with. Disappointing or dissatisfying or upsetting your reader is great when you're like 15 and you want to be edgy. It's less great when you're trying to get a novel off the ground. So, in a story about revenge, Pete asks, you could ask the question, how far will he go for revenge? And will he lose himself in the process? Yeah, those are excellent questions. Fantastic. Because that way you get a main plot and a character arc. Yeah, Pete, that's excellent. Good job. That's exactly how you do that. Good work. Thumbs up. Let's go one more step. Pete, you're good. Good work. So, if we have our satisfying elements, we want to add a little bit of whipped cream to our sundae. We can figure out our theme and find a way to weave our theme into our plot. Now, the theme for Alien is if you're smart and tough and in a hard situation, you can survive. So, do we have a hard situation? Yeah, there's an alien coming to kill all of us. Are you smart and tough? Yes, Ripley is smart and tough. Therefore, she should survive. We weave our theme into our plot by making our theme deal with a question or a challenge faced by the character. Can a know nothing boxer take on the champ? Can you believe in yourself and overcome your own self-doubt and give yourself a shot at success? That's a theme in Rocky. Your theme, whatever it might be, and if you can have more than one, that's fine. But your theme, no matter what, is going to have more impact if you can tie it to the main plot or tie it to the character arc. Yeah, you could tie it to both. That's fine. It's just a lot harder to do that. Pick one or the other. It's going to be a lot easier for you to do. But make sure your theme is there. Now, for me, I can tell you that it's often a lot easier to tie it to your character arc than it is your main plot, because the main plot can be so big and variable depending on what you're writing. But your characters, that's who your reader has related to for however long your book is. but make sure your theme ties into one of them so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I forgot that theme, like you left your coffee on top of the car and then drove away. But we're going to add one more. We're going to add step 6, but we're going to put an if with it because it doesn't really apply all the time. If you're writing a series, if there's going to be more than one book, leave yourself a reason somewhere in the story, not like in the last 10 pages, not in the last 5 chapters, just somewhere in the story that gives it a chance to keep going. So for instance, in Alien, they set up early on the idea that you can go into these pods and cryo sleep, and then the ship takes over on autopilot, and you can get rescued, or you can be, you can make it home safely. So once we introduce that element, which is early on in the story, we have that in our back pocket as a way to go from Alien to Aliens, the sequel. Ripley gets rescued. It's really useful to make it a small detail rather than a big obvious one, because you're not trying to like play a weird game with the reader where they have to guess how there's going to be a sequel. That's weird. Don't get into like a combative relationship with your readership. I don't know why some people delight in doing that. What you want to do instead is just give yourself the option to carry the story forward next time. You're helping yourself, and the reader will thank you for it because you're not beating them over the head with a big blinking neon arrow going, hey, this is how there's a sequel, you guys. Just put it in there and walk away. It can be simple. On we go. Now to my favorite section. Now we're going to fix plots. I spend a lot of time during the day fixing people's plots. I like it because it gives me a chance to ask questions to you, the writer, about what it is you want to say, what you're trying to do, and who the characters are and what they're doing. And the first step is to get you away from thinking about made up people doing made up things. Because while those are true, that is, yes, they are made up people. They are doing made up things. We're looking for depth. We're looking for some thought. We're trying to get an idea across to the reader. So what happens when it goes wrong? We have to fix it. So step number 1, we look at the act structure. We break it into pieces. Where's our first act? Where's our second act? Where's our climax? Where's our third act? If obviously you're doing more than 3 acts, we do this for the other acts too. But we look at the act structure and we try to identify, where does the problem live? Or where does most of it, the majority of it, live? Because in some cases, the problem is everywhere, but it's concentrated in spots. So we're going to look for those spots. If you've got a plot problem in your first act, chances are it's because you're either moving too quickly to go to the urgent plot stuff and only the urgent plot stuff, or you've more or less forgotten to set up the story. It doesn't feel like a story. It doesn't feel like it's taking place anywhere. It's just a list of people who are going places and doing things. It's like a grocery list. We want to make sure we're not moving too quickly in the first act. Now, if you're asking how long is too quickly, and you're wondering, like, is there a page count or a word count? No. Or a chapter count. How many chapters should I be? Don't give a shit. Doesn't matter. That's not how this works. We're not making brownies. I'm not asking you for a cup of oil. It's a matter of, you're in the first act as you develop atmosphere and you connect to the character and you lay out the pieces of the story to come. That's your first act. However long that takes, whether that's 2 chapters, please be more than 1 chapter, 2 chapters, 5 chapters, 60 pages, 30,000 words, whatever. Set up your atmosphere, connect to the character, introduce the challenge of the story. There's your first act requirements. Second act. Problems with your second act are almost always in the extremes. You've done too much of something or too little of it. Now, usually on the too little side, that's too little description. You have people going into rooms and you say, well, it's a children's bed. It's a child's bedroom. And then they go in another room. You don't stop. You forget in this moment that the reader is trying to not just read the words and comprehend them, but they're trying to see a movie in their brain. They're trying to use their imagination to see the story. When you don't describe things, the screen in their mental movie theater goes dark. They don't know what to picture. It's hard to watch a movie with the screen turned off. So too little description is a very common plot problem where we just do the bare minimum and then stop. Some people, though, know that's a problem, so they go the other way. They crank it all the way up and they detail everything. You name it, they'll detail it. They will tell you about the number of like pieces of lint in the dryer trap. They will tell you about the number of bangles on a wrist. They will cover everything. The problem with covering everything is, in order to do that, you have to slow the story down. Remember, we're watching a movie in our brains, and every sentence is a camera putting a picture in our brains. So when you have all these things in every sentence to talk about, that's a lot of pictures, and not all of them are going to be very interesting or very critical. I don't need to know everything about every piece of grass on a lawn, right? So why are we moving so slowly? Be careful in your second act in dealing with extremes. Now, part of this gets resolved by figuring out your writing style. How does, Pete, since I know Pete's in chat, how does Pete write this paragraph is going to inform us how long Pete spends on one idea versus how he spends on another idea. But somebody else might come along and do it differently. I will certainly do it differently because I'm not Pete. Be careful with your extremes and understand that a lot of those problems are going to get solved by sorting out how you write. The other thing that helps solve those second act problems is by understanding how to write sentences. And I know that sounds really simple, and I don't mean it to be, but it's the easiest way to communicate to you that if you write a sentence in a pretty formulaic and dull way, 5 to 7 words, then a comma, then another 3 to 8 words, period, and then repeat over and over and over and over again. And then every four sentences, you hit enter and you do it over and over again. Your reader's going to basically fall into a coma. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. So instead, what we try to do, what we aim to do is vary the way we write sentences. So we use fragments. We use long sentences. We use short sentences. We use punchy little quick things. We use long dragged out things, a combination of stuff so that the reader has to pay attention. The reader has to stay engaged to keep that movie playing in their brain. So let's say we go through the first and second act. Now we reach the climax of the story. A problem with your plot and your climax is almost always related to either speed, how quickly we're going through this, or stakes, how big a deal it is. If you're moving very quickly, it's going to seem like not a big deal. It just seems like we're rushing. If the stakes are huge, it might be slow. That's the trade-off we make. But climax problems with plot are almost always stakes. We just talked about stakes the other week. Or speed, which is, again, the number of words you dedicate to a thing and the number of sentences and how you style them to relay information. Then we get to the third act. And usually by the time we get done the third act, a writer panics because, oh shit, I did all this writing and now I don't know what to do. Better start hand waving and just wrapping things up. The problem is most common with a plot in its third act is that things feel forced and hasty, underdeveloped. I didn't think this through, but it's over and done with, and I just want to get the book done. Oh my God, is it over yet? To fix that, you got to slow down. In a lot of ways, the first act and the third act mirror one another. First acts can run a little slow. Third acts can run a little fast. They can each learn something from the other and learn to ramp in one direction or the other accordingly. Make sense? I'm going to get another mouthful of water. We're almost done. So once we identify the act structure and we start poking around for problems, we can identify sort of the big issues first. And for plot, there's a couple to think about. Is the plot consistently increasing in challenge over time? As the story gets nearer the end, as we move from first to second into climax and third, the challenge, it should be getting harder and tougher for our characters. More burden, more weight, more strain, more intensity, more urgency. Because remember, we're building to that peak. We're building to that climax. So if your challenge isn't increasing, not even consistently would be ideal. But if we're not even doing it inconsistently, Why would the reader keep reading? Why would they stick around if the story just kind of only has a few exciting bursts and then slows down? We want to keep it ramping up and keep it moving, not as quickly as possible. We're not mashing the gas pedal on a drag race, but we're definitely building and building and building and building towards something. The plot should scale upwards over time. Next element, though, kind of the other side of the coin. Do you have the plot spaced out well enough so that it's smoothly moving through the story? And for this, the example I almost always give is I want you to think about a piece of toast with butter on it or jelly, whatever you prefer. We don't want all our stuff that we're putting on this toast globbed into one corner, all the plot stuff in one scene, and then the rest of the bread is dry. The rest of the story doesn't have a lot of plot. We want to spread that butter as evenly as possible because I want to make sure every time I'm biting into my toast, every time I'm engaging with the story, I'm getting a little bit of the plot. We want the plot spread as evenly as possible. And if we can't get evenly, let's just get smoothly and move the characters from event to event, thing to thing over time. Smooth. The exception, of course, being chunky peanut butter, which is definitively better than creamy. But we'll argue about that, I'm certain, another day. Third big issue, at least for plots. Is there enough plot so that main characters are doing more than secondary characters? There's a division of labor here. There's a hierarchy. Some characters should be more involved with your plot than others. Some writers want to get around this by just making more characters, but that's missing the point. You have main characters and you have secondary characters, and you can have a bajillion secondary characters. Doesn't really matter. You should be able to point to your main characters. Sometimes I talk to people about this and I ask, who's your main character? And they say, I have 8 of them. And no, you don't. Or at least no, you shouldn't. They're not all your main. You know how like you like a lot of different kinds of dessert, but you have a special favorite? It's like that. Something is going to be ice cream versus pie. Your main characters are the characters who are getting the biggest parts of the plot. Not the most number quantity wise, but the most important parts. They're your mains, or they should be at least. Your secondary characters can run around and scramble and pick up the table scraps. That's fine. But you want to make sure there's a very clear, unequal, uneven division. We are going to messily slice this pie up into slices so that your secondary characters get a smaller percentage than your main characters. Because even though, yeah, we're all part of the same crew, all fighting the space aliens, some of us are red shirts and some of us are the captain. There are going to be unequal divisions, and that's what's going to help make the plot feel substantial. On we go. And then we get a little technical. I'm going to make this not technical. You want to move up and down what's called the hierarchy. Technically, it's called Price's hierarchy, but Price has been dead about a century-ish. He's not really important anymore, but the way he helped organize the ideas of stories occasionally is helpful to people. So we start by dealing with main characters first, and we ask some very straightforward questions for every main character. And you want to do this individually, but if you've only got one character, it'll go pretty quick. But if you're doing like multiple point of view fantasy story, you're going to do this more than once. For your main character, what is the challenge they're faced with? Why does this challenge matter to them? And here's the challenge and it matters to them. So what are they doing about it? Then secondary characters. They're going to have the same questions as main characters, but their answers and their portion of contribution will be smaller. What is the challenge they're facing? Their relationship to it is now removed. They're not main characters. So yes, the ship is under attack by hostile aliens, but it's more for the main like bridge crew to deal with. I'm just the guy over here in like the kitchen. What is the challenge they're facing? Why does it matter? Because I don't want to die. And what are they doing about it? I'm not dying. I'm hiding here, waiting for security to come and save me on Star Trek. Main character to secondary character to antagonist. And again, we're going to ask the same questions. What are they trying to do? Why does it matter? And what are they doing about it? It's worth pointing out that your answers for your antagonist should not be the polar opposite of your answers for your main characters. We do not want to necessarily always end up in a situation where, you know, they say water and the other guy says fire and they cancel each other out. We don't want a zero sum here. The antagonist, the challenge is trying to overcome and defeat the villains. For the main character, the challenge is we need to make this right. That is a subtle distinction, but an important distinction. It matters to them. 9 times out of 10, there's a selfish reason as opposed to a more altruistic reason or a broader philosophical reason for the main characters. We're the good guys. We do good guy stuff, whereas the antagonist is selfish and just wants to rule the world. And what are they doing about it? They're doing the plot. The bad guy does the plot. That's all the bad guy does. I'm the one sending the goons to go stop He-Man. I'm doing the plot. Once that's done, we move to the last part, the world. A lot of writers skimp here because it's messy or they haven't thought it through or they've overcomplicated the other parts and it feels like there's no room for it. But here's the rest of it. Here's the world. And the world questions are always about threat and winning and losing. So how is the plot a threat to the world? Now, I don't mean like the whole globe. If your story takes place in 100 square miles of, I don't know, countryside, that's the world. Or if it just takes place in a small town in Maine, or if it's just on a spaceship or whatever, that's your world. What threat is the plot to that world? How big a deal is it is the next question. How much threat is it? Well, the clown can come out of the sewers every once in a while and totally eat some kids. That's a big deal. Okay. Next question. This plot, the thing that's a threat, what's being risked here? Now, sometimes that question is as simple as, well, it could destroy the world. That's plenty. But other times it's more nuanced and twisty and bendy, smaller. Sometimes we're only risking social standing, economic future, the fields of fruit, something like that. So what's risked? And then because stuff is being risked, there has to be a gain, a chance to win, a positive thing. What do we get if we win? How do we go to the showcase showdown? How do we defeat, the evil villain? What's our reward? That question is tied to the world because the world provides those opportunities. Oh, if we defeat the villain, then we all get to live in peace and harmony. Hooray! That's a world thing. That's not an antagonist thing. By understanding the hierarchy and moving and passing the plot through each of these questions, you help make sure that these parts, the main character, the secondary character, your antagonist, and your world, connect to each other in some way, which ties us all the way back to plot as reaction and interaction, because this is how we build those interactions and relationships. So here's a few more last minute notes, and then we'll get out of here. Sometimes when I start poking plot I start talking plot with a writer and I start poking it with a stick, they get really frustrated and their gut instinct is to delete or rewrite like wholesale, big giant chunks. I don't mean like to take out a word. I mean like I'll rewrite the whole chapter or I'll come up with a whole new story. Don't do that. Don't do that. Because that's not going to help you learn the lesson. You're just going to do the same things in a new story. The problem isn't that you made a bad idea from the jump and you've just been going down the wrong avenue. The problem is that you need to just fix this single conflict, figure out this plot, and it'll work just fine. You don't always have to start over. That's not an effective strategy for getting better. It seems like it is, but all you're really doing is running away from the problem rather than solving it. Next part, related to this. If we're going to fix a plot or improve it, it means we have to take it all apart. All of it, the whole thing, which is why we go through the hierarchy like we do, why we break it down into pieces, and why we handle it one act at a time. And when we do that, We look at just that piece in front of us. When we're working on our first act and trying to figure out like, okay, what do I say? What do I hold off for later? We don't think about, well, in 17 chapters, I need to have them go to lunch. That doesn't matter anymore. We're taking this one piece apart, seeing what this piece is, getting that piece in its best shape, and then getting it back in place. One piece at a time. We want to assume very little and just build as best we can what's in front of us. This is also a really good time to point out that if you have multiple points of view, you're not going to solve them in mass. You're going to treat each, because the reader won't either. Your multiple points of view basically say, I have 6 individual single point of view stories, and I've packaged them all into one manuscript. That's what multiple point of view means. You just put 5 kids in a trench coat as opposed to one person in a trench coat. So we fix them one thing at a time. Maybe you're seeing a theme here about fixing one thing at a time. As for what we're thinking, or what we're fixing, I should say, we want to try and think about this in terms of whether or not we've moved away from a conflict. Because we don't want to really go away from conflict. We like conflict. Conflict is our friend. Conflict is interesting. That doesn't always mean action beats or fights or gunfights or car chases. It can also be just 2 people arguing, or somebody having like aggressive, plot or something. It doesn't always have to be physical altercation, but there's going to be a conflict. Lean into them when you have them. Find them, develop them. But cautionary note, we don't want to explain them. Here is why Susie is upset. Here is why Barbara is upset. No, don't want that. We want to make sure that the reader relates to the situation, because in relating to it, they'll understand it better. Do you understand why this person is upset? Do you understand why that person is upset? Do you understand why they are now like giving each other the finger in the Whole Foods parking lot? We want to aim to help the reader relate to the plot, as opposed to you explaining that upon the 7th moon there was a sign and the comet streaked across the sky, and therefore, according to the prophecy of such and such and so and so. You don't explain, you relate. Think about the relationship the reader has to the material and the characters have to the reader. It's about relating, building that bridge. One last note, then we'll get out of here. Your plot, whatever it is, that's the thing the characters are doing because they're the only ones who are best suited to do it. Loads of people could. I'm sure if you threw enough, Marines at it, eventually they'd solve the same problem that the Avengers could. But by and large, your protagonists have a reason to do the story. Your reader doesn't care what that reason is. Your reader cares that the characters want to succeed. The reader wants to root the characters onto victory. Period. I want that couple to fall in love. I want the good guys to defeat the bad guy. I want the killer caught before they strike again. I want the thief caught and the thing returned to the owner. Your job is to make the reader want the characters to succeed at their goal. I want Keanu Reeves to murder every single person because they killed a puppy. I don't care about the nuanced relationships past that. I'm enjoying the story and I want my character to succeed. If you can get in that headspace and keep that moving in the story, your reader will buy in and stay in. And that's a plot. That's why we talk about plot so much. So, questions. I know it was a lot. Yes, of course, this will be up on YouTube forever and ever and ever. Shall we get out of here? This will also be on the podcast feed shortly. Shall we go? I want to thank everybody, every single one of you for being here. Thank you so much. Thanks, Pete. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Thanks for checking this out. Thanks for coming on a Monday. Obviously because we're streaming. I'm here today. I will not be here tomorrow because a million things, and scheduling is a monster nightmare for me, but I'm here and I'm happy all the same. Thanks for being here. Um, I really wanted to tell you, like, oh, I'll do something on Thursday. I don't think I'm going to be able to do something on Thursday this week. There's still a million more things to do, and scheduling is a bear. So until then, until I see you next, let's plan to meet back here in your eyes and in your ears on the 23rd of April. That's next Tuesday, where we will do, something. I don't know what. We'll figure it out. If you want to find out what that is, head over to johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com and sign up for the newsletter. Because that'll tell you in advance what I'm doing. I know today was kind of last minute, but yeah, I'll try not to have that be the case. If you want help with your plot for free, absolutely completely free, head over to johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com and go sign up for a free appointment. And let's talk about your plot. Let's talk about how to fix things. Let's do that good stuff and help you write a book. If you like this and you want more and you want bigger stuff and more complicated stuff and crazier, wild stuff, and you want to hear me complain about Collateral and Anatomy of a Fall and all the Star Trek movies, character descriptions can be a thing. Head over to patreon.com/John Helps You Write Better. And $2 a month. It will absolutely positively make a difference for all of us. You want character descriptions as a future topic? Where's my notepad? That's a great idea. Let's do it. We'll do that next week. Let me grab a pen. Hang on. Character descriptions. See how easy it is to just suggest a new topic? I write it down and here we go. Fine. We're going to do character descriptions next week, everybody. That'll be nice. Okay. So until then, if there's nothing else, let's get out of here. See ya.